In the last 4 episodes, we have been mapping the forces that run your entire human operating system. You have the mind, the heart, the ego, the fear, the body. And if you have been following carefully, you will have noticed something. Each of those forces, left ungoverned, produce a specific kind of dysfunction. The ungoverned mind rationalizes, it serves whatever force is strongest and calls it reasoning. The suppressed heart loses its signal. The moral sort of self that gets buried under the layers of justification. The ungoverned ego runs the entire system by default, protecting, positioning, defending. The unchallenged fear disguises itself as wisdom and governs from the shadows. The ignored body accumulates what the mind suppresses and reports it through chronic physical signals nobody is reading. But now we are going to look at what governs all of them. What is the force that, when it is genuinely present, creates a context in which the ego steps back willingly? Fear loses its authority, the mind serves something larger than its own cleverness, and the body is used as an instrument of purpose rather than managed as a source of comfort. He had the house, the career, the income, the status, the relationship, the holidays, and a car that said something about him before he even opened his mouth. So from the outside, his life looked exactly like what success is supposed to look like. And he could not tell you what was wrong with it. Not in any specific articulable manner. Nothing was broken, nothing was missing that he could point to. Nobody had wronged him. No obvious crisis had arrived. Just a feeling. Not depression, but like an anxiety, a sort of form of restlessness. Something quiet and harder to name than either of all the above things. A hollowness. The sense that he was moving through his days efficiently, productively, successfully, but that none of it was connected to anything that actually mattered to him. That he was very good at a life he had never quite consciously chosen. That the machine was running and he was inside it, and it was running well, and he had no idea why that felt so wrong. So if you recognize something in that description, not necessarily the circumstances, but that feeling, then you already understand what this episode is about before I even name it. Because that feeling is not a personal failing. It is not ingratitude. It's not weakness. It is a signal of a force that has been starved for so long, so gradually, so quietly, that most people cannot even remember what it felt like when it was fed. Today we talk about the spirit, which ancient scholars call the ruh, but spirit for the purpose of this episode. Not in any religious sense, not with any theological framework or cultural tradition attached to it. We are going to dissect this in a secular way where everybody understands what we are referring to when we talk about the spirit as a force, a precise, diagnosable, absolutely fundamental force in the human operating system, a force that you cannot ignore. The force of purpose, of meaning, of the sense that your life is pointed towards something beyond the management of your own comfort. The force that, when it is active, changes the relationship between every other force in the system. And the force that, when it is absent, produces a life that works perfectly on paper and feels hollow in practice. In the last 4 episodes, we have been mapping the forces that run your entire human operating system. You have the mind, the heart, the ego, the fear, the body. And if you have been following carefully, you will have noticed something. Each of those forces, left ungoverned, produce a specific kind of dysfunction. The ungoverned mind rationalizes, it serves whatever force is strongest and calls it reasoning. The suppressed heart loses its signal. The moral sort of self that gets buried under the layers of justification. The ungoverned ego runs the entire system by default, protecting, positioning, defending. The unchallenged fear disguises itself as wisdom and governs from the shadows. The ignored body accumulates what the mind suppresses and reports it through chronic physical signals nobody is reading. But now we are going to look at what governs all of them. What is the force that, when it is genuinely present, creates a context in which the ego steps back willingly? Fear loses its authority, the mind serves something larger than its own cleverness, and the body is used as an instrument of purpose rather than managed as a source of comfort. This force is the spirit. And here is what makes it different from any other force in the system. All other forces operate primarily in protection mode. The ego protects identity, fear protects safety, desire protects comfort. Even the mind at its most sophisticated manner is primarily a defense mechanism. The spirit, on the other hand, is the only force in the human operating system that is not primarily about protection. It is about direction. It is about meaning. It is about purpose. It asks not, how do I keep what I have, but what am I actually here to do? And when that question is alive in the operating system, genuinely alive, not as a poster on a wall or a statement in a bio, the relationship between every other force changes. And let me show you that what happens to an operating system, the human operating system, when the spirit force is absent. Not damaged, not destroyed, just absent, starved and inactive. And there is a way how over the years this whole force is subdued amongst the noise of all the other forces that become dominant. It produces a very specific profile, and you will recognize it immediately, either in yourself or in someone you know well. The person in the profile is functional, often highly functional. They show up, they produce, they manage their responsibilities, they fulfill their obligations, but underneath the functionality, something is running on fumes. Their discipline is weakened. They're pushed through because they have to, not because they are pulled forward by something that matters. So the discipline is exhausting in a way that seems disproportionate to the actual demands being made of them. Their relationships are maintained rather than nourished. They are present without being truly there, connected without feeling connected. Their achievements produce satisfaction that evaporates very quickly. The goal is reached, the feeling lasts briefly, then the same hollowness returns, and the mind immediately moves to the next target, because movement feels better than stillness, and stillness is where the hollowness becomes undeniable. Their restlessness is chronic but sourceless. They cannot name what is missing, so they cannot address it directly. They address it indirectly with busyness, with consumption, with the constant low-level noise of life, structured to avoid the question that cannot really, truly answer themselves. So here's the piece that most people miss. They assume this hollowness is produced by the absence of comfort, so they pursue more comfort, more ease, more relief, more of whatever temporarily fills that space, and this feeling inside of them, this emptiness, what I call it, remains, because comfort and meaning feel similar enough in the short term that comfort becomes a substitute when meaning is unavailable or inconvenient, but they are not the same thing. Comfort satisfies the body and temporarily quietens the ego. It does not feed the spirit, and a spirit that is constantly starved and fed its real true nourishment of purpose and meaning, after a while it stops giving out the signals of hunger because it has been quietened and it's no longer loud. The person no longer feels the emptiness acutely. They feel settled, and settled in a life built entirely almost around comfort is the most dangerous state of all, because it feels like you've arrived, you've achieved something, when it actually is distance. The person who feels acutely hollow is closer to change than the person who has become comfortably numb, because the acute hollowness, that feeling of emptiness, inside is the spirit is still signaling, giving out signs that it needs its proper nourishment. The numbness is what happens when the signal has been suppressed long enough to fade away slowly. And this is what a spirit-starved life looks like in practice. Not a dramatic collapse, not an obvious crisis, just a life lived at a slight but permanent angle from genuine alignment. And the uncomfortable truth is that this is not rare. This is the dominant operating mode of most people in the modern world. Not because they are broken, because the spirit force is the most easily suppressed force in the entire operating system. And the conditions of modern life are such that no matter how unintentionally you try to suppress it, you end up suppressing the spirit. And what I want to explain is precisely how the spirit gets suppressed, because once you understand this mechanism, you will see it operating everywhere. The first mechanism, comfort as a substitute for meaning. Meaning requires something of you. Purpose requires something from you. It requires discomfort. It requires this discomfort, uncertainty, the willingness to be in service of something larger than your own management. Comfort requires nothing except access to whatever produces the most comfortable feeling. And in a world where comfort is available on demand because of your phone, the food, the screen, the compulsive consumption of material goods, purchasing them, the operating system learns very quickly the discomfort of meaningful engagement can always be postponed in favor of immediate relief. So no one single decision destroys the spirit, but thousands of small decisions you choose where you're choosing comfort over meaning and purpose. And in those many moments that you feel that you're making an insignificant decision, over a period of time, it has a cumulative effect on your life. Let's think of a real life example. Robin Williams is an Oscar-winning actor who was one of the most gifted of his generation. By external measure, success, wealth, adoration, he had everything. But privately, he was a man who described a persistent emptiness that the applause never filled. Not because he lacked comfort, because comfort was never the thing the spirit was asking for. That emptiness was the spirit still sending him signals that it needs like feeding. It is feeling empty. The tragedy is that it went unheard for too long. The second mechanism is performing purpose rather than living it. It is possible to talk about purpose constantly, to post about it, to build an identity around it, while the spirit force itself remains largely inactive. The precise test: does the energy collapse when the audience disappears? Genuine spirit-led purpose feels the same whether anyone is watching or not. The ego-managed performance of purpose requires the audience. Remove the audience and the energy changes. It collapses basically. This is how people spend years articulating what they are building while the actual building remains largely undone. We all know people like that who just talk the talk, the performance. They're just carrying out a performance in public, the performance of purpose. Satisfied enough of the spirit's need to reduce the discomfort of not actually living it. You see this in the wellness and motivation space constantly. Accounts built entirely around the language of purpose and transformation, where the content is the product, the audience is the fuel, and the moment the numbers drop, the mission somehow loses its urgency. That is not the spirit governing, that is the ego wearing the spirit's clothes. Let that land for a moment. So let yourself truly try and grasp and understand what I've just said there. That this performance that people are performing is not really truly living that meaningful and purposeful life. So the third mechanism, borrowed purpose. Many people are living someone else's version of a meaningful life. The part that made sense to the people who raised them. The career that impressed the people whose approval mattered. See this all the time. The parents who want their children to be doctors, engineers and lawyers, and the children carry out those wishes of their parents, but end up spending a lifetime of misery because they are in a career which no longer, well, which probably never served their purpose in the first instance, because they were just doing that to satisfy their parents. This is what you call borrowed purpose. You cannot sustain this for years. This is something that will ultimately collapse inwardly for sure. Outwardly, they may continue with that charade for years and years or for the rest of their life. Is this you? Is this you, or do you recognize anybody in this scenario? Remember, Andre Agassi in his autobiography revealed that he had hated tennis for most of his career. Amazing, isn't it? The sport that made him one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet was a purpose borrowed from his father's ambition, installed before he had the capacity to choose. He won Grand Slams, he was the world number one, and privately he described the emptiness of achieving everything in a life that never felt entirely his. That question, is this mine? Ask yourself, are you going through a life where you have also borrowed somebody else's purpose or living somebody else's purpose? That question, is this mine, is the spirit force attempting to reactivate after a long suppression? And the answer frequently requires dismantling something that looks successful from the outside to build something that feels true from the inside. This is the cost the ego will resist with everything it has. Now, let me bring this topic into a different dimension where we're looking at actual experiences. Think about the last time you did something that felt genuinely meaningful, not impressive, not productive, not successful by any external measure. Meaningful in the specific sense that while you were doing it, you were not counting the cost, not monitoring how it appeared, not calculating what it would produce. You were simply present. You were simply engaged with something that mattered in a way that required nothing from the outside to confirm it or to validate it. When was the last time this happened for you? And how long ago was this? Now apply the same diagnostic test. Think about the things you describe as purposeful in your life right now. The work you say matters, the projects you talk about, the contributions you identify with, and ask yourself honestly, what happens to your energy around these things when nobody is watching? When there is no post to write about, no cameras to capture the performance for social media, no conversation where you can describe it, no moment of recognition. Does the engagement sustain itself, or does it require the audience to validate it and for you to give you the fuel to continue? Because if the energy collapses in private, the spirit is not actually governing this. The ego is managing the performance, and the distinction matters enormously. Not as a judgment, but we are just trying to diagnose this. Because a person who understands they are performing purpose rather than living it is in a position to change that. A person who mistakes the performance for the real thing never examines the gap between them. Now think about the description of this, whether it applies to your life or not. And is this an area of your life that needs this discipline? The things you know you should do and consistently struggle to sustain. The habits that start and stop. The commitments that erode. The resolutions that don't hold. And the question that you have to ask about each and every single one of these things that you are involved in. Are you trying to sustain this through willpower alone? Or is there something that genuinely matters underneath it? Something that makes the discipline feel worth it even when it is difficult? Because willpower-based discipline and purpose-based discipline feel completely different from the inside. Willpower-based discipline is a constant negotiation. Every day the cost is reassessed, and the other days cost feels too high, and then you have to ask yourself whether you want to do it on that day or not. The discipline can collapse. But the purpose-based discipline is different. On the difficult days there is still a pull. No matter how much obstacles, the weather may not be in your favor, or the circumstances may not be right, but you still feel the urge to get up and do it. You're not performing for anybody else. So if your discipline keeps collapsing, the question is not usually about willpower. It is about whether the spirit is genuinely engaged. And now the hardest question: if you strip everything away in your life that you do for approval, for security, for performance purposes, what remains? What would you be doing? What would you be truly building, contributing and creating if none of the external pressures existed? That question, held honestly, without the mind rushing in to make it a theoretical exercise to rationalize anything that you do not agree with, the spirit does not agree with, is the spirit trying to identify itself and to discover its true purpose and meaning. And whatever comes up when you sit with it quietly, that is a data worth taking seriously. Now, how is it that the spirit force actually operates in the human operating system when it is genuinely activated? And this is what makes it unlike every other force in the system, because when the spirit is alive, genuinely activated, not in a performance mode, but geared towards the direction of meaning and purpose, it does not compete with the other forces by being louder than them. It changes what they are competing for. It has the ability to give direction to all the other forces. Let me explain that. When the spirit is absent, the ego, the desires and the mind are all competing to govern the operating system. And since the ego is the default dominant force, it normally wins. It usually wins. When the spirit is genuinely present, these forces do not disappear, but they find themselves oriented towards something larger than their own usual concerns. The ego, which normally consumes enormous energy protecting identity and managing status, finds that when there is a genuine purpose it cares about, the status question becomes less urgent. Not irrelevant, but less urgent. Because the purpose provides a source of significance that does not depend on external validation. Fear, which normally governs through the threat of loss and change, finds that when there is something genuinely worth moving forward, the calculation changes. The question is no longer just what could I lose by acting, but what will I lose by not acting. The mind, which normally serves whatever force is strongest, finds that when the spirit is directing, it has something genuinely worth serving, and it produces its best work in that configuration, not rationalization, actual clarity. That is why the spirit is the force that makes every other force worth governing. Without it, governing the other forces is an act of willpower. It becomes exhausting and even unsustainable in the long run. So with it, governing the other forces becomes purposeful. The discipline has a destination. The restraint serves something. The effort is in service of something that matters. And here's the most important practical point about how the spirit force actually activates. You can't sort of just think your way into it. This is where most people who are genuinely searching for meaning get stuck. They believe that if they think about purpose carefully enough, read about it, journal about it, discuss it, the spirit will activate. The spirit actually activates through engagement, through doing things that actually matter. The person who is waiting to feel purposeful before they act purposefully is waiting for a signal that only arrives in response to action. The discipline comes first, the pull follows, not always immediately, not always dramatically, but consistently for those who act first and wait for the feeling second, rather than waiting for the feeling before they act. So let that land for a moment. You can't discover meaning and purpose just by reading books and think that you'll be automatically, leaping into action or forced into action. You have to take action first, and then that strengthens that feeling of moving in a direction towards something which is feeding the spirit. It's not found through just searching. It's built through doing. Start with small, honest engagement, the things that feel like they matter to you, even when you cannot even articulate why you are doing something. And just give it the attention and take action. And the spirit signal, which was always there, will begin to strengthen. And I want to stop here and address something very directly as a final thought, because the moment purpose and meaning enter a conversation, a specific objection tends to arise. Some people know exactly what they are here to do and simply have not done it yet. Some people genuinely do not know, and the pressure to find their purpose feels like one more thing that they are failing at. I want to address both honestly. Firstly, the person who knows but has not acted, the spirit is not absent in your case, it is suppressed by the ego's fear of the exposure that genuine commitment would require, by the comfort of performing the intention without bearing the cost of living it, by the borrowed purpose that fills the space and makes the delay feel temporary rather than permanent. The work for you is not discovery, it is courage. The courage to move forward, take action, and make it happen. For the person who genuinely does not know, the pressure to identify a grand life purpose before you begin living purposefully is itself one of the mechanisms that keeps the spirit force inactive. Purpose is not always found, sometimes it is built, not through thinking about what matters, but through doing things that feel like they matter and paying attention to which ones produce the spirit's signal. That signal is recognizable even if its source is not yet clear. Here is a quality of what engagement does that does not require external reward to sustain itself. It is a kind of sort of tired feeling from the exhaustion of doing things that cost you without feeding you. It's the sense that however brief, however quiet, that what you are doing is connected to something real. Start here, not with grand articulation, but with small, honest signal and follow it further. Because the tension will always be there. The spirit force is the only force in your operating system that cannot be manufactured. Every other force can be stimulated externally. Desire can be triggered, fear can be installed, the ego can be flattered, even the body can be chemically altered. The spirit cannot be manufactured. There's something special about the spirit. It has come from a different realm. Yes, that's right. We are like an alien force where we do not just belong to this earthly world. We have come from a different spiritual realm. That's why the spirit force is one of the most strongest forces. It's the most strongest force in our body. But we really need to nurture it. We need to hear it. We cannot suppress it at the expense of a truly purposeful life, because we have been giving more priority to the comfort, to the external stimulation, to the external fears and validations of life. That's why the spirit, we end up starving, we end up sort of suppressing. And this is what causes the restlessness inside of us, which causes the emptiness, which ultimately leads people to anxiety and some to the extreme action of even suicide, ending their life, because having all the outward trappings of wealth, they still do not understand why they are so empty from the inside. It's simply because the life force inside of them has been deprived of its true meaning and purpose. Just by chasing money or status doesn't necessarily mean you are living a truly purposeful life. You are living in that moment even an egocentric life, which is just on the path of consumption, whether it's for name and fame, it's for validation, it's for earning money, for other purposes, just to fulfill your material needs. But you are not necessarily living a life built on meaning and purpose. And until you don't do that, the spirit inside will always remain starved.